holding my 9-year-old daughter, Zuri, tight by the hand. I walked through the front door of our home wearing my dress uniform. I had just been promoted to colonel in the United States Army. It should have been a day of celebration. Instead, my husband Marcus and his secretary Chloe were standing in the marble foyer. Two of my suitcases were packed and sitting by the door. Chloe leaned against the console table, twirling a pen, and smirked. "Pack your bags, soldier." I just smiled, covered my daughter's ears, and looked right back at her. "Okay. What is so funny?" Chloe snapped, dropping the pen. I took the divorce papers Marcus was holding and signed them without missing a beat. "Actually," I said, handing the papers back, "this house belongs to Vanguard Properties. And as the sole owner of Vanguard, you both have exactly 10 minutes to vacate my property before the military police arrive." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic partner who underestimated your true worth. My name is Maya. I am 39 years old, a logistics and strategic intelligence officer, and a woman who spent the last 10 years swallowing disrespect to keep the peace in my household. Marcus and I had been married for 8 years. To the outside world, specifically our tight-knit African-American community in Atlanta, Marcus was the picture of Black excellence. He wore custom suits, drove a leased luxury car, and talked endlessly about generational wealth. He called himself an entrepreneur. In reality, he was drowning in secret debt, using my stable military income as a safety net while he played CEO. I unlocked the front door. Marcus was standing by the sweeping staircase with his arms crossed. Standing next to him, wearing my favorite silk robe, was Chloe, his arrogant 25-year-old executive assistant. Two large suitcases were shoved near the coat rack. "Welcome home," Colonel Marcus said, his voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. "I am glad you are wearing your uniform. It is fitting considering the military is your real spouse." "Marcus, what is this?" I asked. "This is the end of the road, Maya." He shoved a thick manila folder toward my chest. "Divorce papers signed, notarized, and ready to be filed. I am done playing second fiddle to your deployments. I am a successful Black man, building an empire. I need a woman who nurtures that, who stays home and supports my vision, not a soldier who abandons her family for the government." Chloe stepped forward, tightening the belt on my robe. "He needs a soft woman. You are too masculine. Pack your bags, soldier." He packed the essentials for you. "The rest we will ship to whatever barracks they put you in." Zuri squeezed my hand, her small body trembling. "Mommy, what is wrong?" she whispered. "See," Marcus scoffed. "You traumatize your own child. You have been neglecting us for years, playing war games while I held this family together. I built my company from the ground up. This is my house, Maya, and I want you out of it. Chloe and I are moving forward." Marcus had not paid a single mortgage bill in 6 years. His so-called empire was a struggling consulting firm that had not turned a profit since it opened. He used my good credit to lease his expensive car. He had spent years gaslighting me, telling me I was a terrible Black mother because my career required hard sacrifice. He weaponized our culture and our tight community against me, making me feel like I was destroying our family unit every single time I put on my uniform. I looked at Marcus, puffing his chest like a rooster. The Maya who begged for his affection died a long time ago. I knelt down and gently covered Zuri's ears. Then I stood back up and looked Marcus dead in the eye. I opened the door, pulled the expensive gold pen from his breast pocket, and signed the divorce papers right there on the wall. I handed them back to him. "Okay," I said. Chloe laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "What is so funny?" she snapped. "Are you in shock? Did the big tough soldier finally break?" I smoothed the lapel of my uniform. "Actually," I said, keeping my tone conversational, "there is a small detail you missed in your grand exit strategy, Marcus. You see, this house does not belong to you. You never signed the deed. You never paid the mortgage." Marcus frowned, his arrogant posture slipping just a fraction. "What are you talking about? We bought this house together. I am on the title." "You are on a lease agreement," I corrected. "I bought this house through a corporate entity to protect my assets from your creditors. This house is legally owned by Vanguard Logistics and Properties." Chloe rolled her eyes. "So what? She gets half the company in the divorce." "No," I smiled, relishing the confusion washing over his face. He gets nothing. Because Vanguard is a blind trust established long before we even met. I am the sole owner. And since you just handed me signed divorce papers, your marital residency rights are officially terminated. Marcus dropped the folder. The papers scattered across the marble floor. Maya stopped playing games. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed a number I had saved for a very special occasion. As the owner of Vanguard, I am formally evicting you both. You have exactly 10 minutes to vacate my property before the military police arrive to escort you off the premises for trespassing. The color drained from Marcus's face. Chloe stepped back suddenly, realizing the silk robe she was wearing was not a victory prize but stolen property. 10 minutes, Marcus, I said softly. The clock is ticking. Marcus stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. He patted his tailored jacket pockets, pulling out his cell phone with trembling fingers. He dialed a number, his eyes darting frantically between me and the packed suitcases sitting by the door. Mama Pat, he practically whined into the receiver, using the pet name he knew would manipulate her. You need to get over here right now. Maya has lost her mind. She is trying to throw me out on the street. I did not stop him. I simply guided Zuri up the sweeping staircase, kissing her forehead and telling her to put on her noise-canceling headphones and read a book in her room until I came to get her. I wanted her insulated from the incoming storm. I walked back down the stairs just as the sound of screeching tires echoed from the driveway outside. Car doors slammed with force. Footsteps pounded up the front walk. Marcus had barely unlatched the heavy oak front door before my mother Patricia barged inside. She wore her immaculate Sunday church suit, a matching hat, and a look of fury that she usually reserved for disobedient children. Behind her paraded my younger sister Jasmine, draped in expensive designer labels, funded entirely by my mother. Flanking Jasmine was her husband Chad, a slick real estate broker who always looked at me like I was something unpleasant scraped off the bottom of his leather loafer. Maya Jefferson, my mother shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling of the foyer. She marched right up to my personal space and violently slapped her hand against my wrist, trying to physically knock the proud military posture out of my shoulders. Have you lost your entire mind throwing your black husband out of his own home? Are you actively trying to destroy the black family unit? You are bringing unimaginable shame to our family and to our entire church congregation. I looked down at where her hand had struck my uniform, then met her furious gaze with absolute calm. My house, mother, I corrected her. My property. And he is the one standing here with his mistress. I gestured toward Chloe, who was currently trying to shrink into the background shadows while still wearing my expensive silk robe. Patricia did not even flinch at the sight of the mistress. She did not express a single ounce of outrage for my broken marriage. She simply waved her manicured hand dismissively. Men make mistakes when they feel emasculated, Maya. If you were a real nurturing wife, instead of a rigid, unfeeling soldier, he would not have to look elsewhere for comfort. You are an embarrassment to me. Jasmine stepped forward, crossing her arms and looking me up and down with pure, unadulterated disgust. You always were so bitter. Jasmine scoffed, her voice laced with the arrogance of a lifelong golden child. Just because you do not know how to be loved does not mean you get to ruin the life Marcus built. This is exactly why Mom had to force you to get married in a cheap courthouse. Remember that. Mom paid $100,000 for my wedding because Chad and I represent a real union. You got a $50 license because women in uniform do not deserve romance. You are just a cold paycheck in combat boots. I stared at my sister, refusing to let her cruel words pierce my armor. I got married in a courthouse because I was shipping out to Afghanistan the next week, Jasmine. I was serving my country while you were throwing tantrums over imported flower arrangements. Chad chuckled, stepping in front of his wife to physically shield her from my gaze. He adjusted the cuffs of his expensive suit and looked down his nose at me. He always loved using his proximity to a black family to exercise his racial microaggressions, masking his deep-seated bigotry behind a thin veneer of brotherly advice. Listen here, angry black woman, Chad said, lowering his voice into a condescending, arrogant drawl. You might be used to barking orders at lower-ranking grunts on the base, but this is the real corporate world. Marital law in this state splits assets 50-50. It does not matter what kind of cute little shell company you set up to hide your military paychecks. My high-powered lawyers will tear Vanguard Logistics apart by tomorrow morning. You are going to be paying Marcus alimony for the rest of your miserable life. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of the explosive anger they so desperately wanted to see. I simply reached into the inside pocket of my uniform jacket and pulled out a crisp, folded legal document. I stepped deliberately past Marcus, past my fuming mother, and handed the paper directly to Chad. You might want to read the latest updates from the State Bar Association before you make promises about your legal representation, I said smoothly. Chad snatched the paper from my hand, his smug grin still plastered across his face. As his eyes scanned the printed text, the color rapidly drained from his cheeks. His jaw went slack and his hands began to tremble. Your lawyer was disbarred this morning for massive money laundering, I informed him, projecting my voice so every single person in the foyer could hear perfectly. A federal investigation that coincidentally Vanguard Intelligence assisted with. Chad swallowed hard, clutching the paper as if it might save him from drowning. But that is not the best part. I continued stepping closer into his personal space and lowering my voice to a lethal whisper. That massive commercial lot right on Fifth Avenue, the exact one you desperately need for your new strip mall project to pay off your private loans. Vanguard Properties just bought the debt from your primary lender. I own the note, Chad. I am calling in the full balance effective immediately. You are completely bankrupt, Chad. Chad collapsed against the mahogany console table, gasping for air, as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. My mother stared at me, her jaw unhinged, unable to form a single coherent sentence to defend her precious son-in-law. Jasmine clutched her designer pearls, her facade of superiority crumbling into absolute terror. Marcus grabbed Chloe by the arm and dragged her toward the door, kicking his own suitcase out of the way. You are going to pay for this, Maya. He spat over his shoulder, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and rage. You think you can just pull the rug out from under us and walk away? I am going to bleed you dry. I watched them scramble out of my house, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind them. I took a deep breath, letting the silence wash over the foyer. I had won the battle, but I knew Marcus well enough to know he would immediately try to win the war. The retaliation came less than 12 hours later. The next morning, I took Zuri to a prestigious private academy in Buckhead to purchase her new fall uniforms and school supplies. We stood at the checkout counter with a stack of blazers, textbooks, and a new laptop. I handed the cashier my primary debit card, a joint account I had foolishly kept active with Marcus to maintain the illusion of our partnership. The cashier swiped the card. It beeped a harsh red tone. Decline, she said, offering a polite but strained smile. I frowned and handed her a secondary credit card. Declined again. A hot flush of embarrassment crept up my neck as the affluent mothers in line behind me began to shift impatiently, whispering to each other. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Every single account connected to Marcus displayed a zero balance. My savings, my military deployment back pay, my emergency funds were completely gone. The screen flashed a bright red notification indicating the accounts had been frozen by the primary account holder under a power of attorney directive. A sick memory bubbled up in my mind. 3 years ago, before my deployment to Syria, Marcus had convinced my mother to pressure me into signing a general power of attorney. He claimed it was necessary to protect the Black family unit and manage the household while I was fighting overseas. My mother had lectured me for days about trusting my Black husband, saying a woman who withheld financial control was emasculating her man. I had signed it to keep the peace. Now he was using that same document to financially starve me and my daughter. I paid for Zuri's school supplies using a covert Vanguard corporate card I kept hidden in my phone case. I dropped Zuri off at my Aunt Sarah's house, the only relative I actually trusted, and drove straight to the downtown branch of our bank. I walked through the heavy glass doors of the financial institution, my military boots clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. I immediately spotted Marcus and Chloe standing at the VIP teller window. They were not trying to be discreet. In fact, Marcus was speaking loudly, deliberately, drawing the attention of the other patrons and the bank staff. Transfer the remaining $2 million to the Cayman Islands account. Immediately, Marcus ordered the teller, his chest puffed out in a pathetic display of dominance. My wife is suffering from severe military trauma, and I have full power of attorney. I need to secure our assets before her mental decline ruins our generational wealth. Chloe leaned against the marble counter, inspecting her manicured nails. She spotted me walking toward them and nudged Marcus, letting out a sharp, malicious laugh. "Look who decided to show up," she mocked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger in my direction. "The broke soldier. Did your card decline at the grocery store, honey?" Marcus turned around, a smug, satisfied grin spreading across his face. He looked at my uniform with pure contempt. "You should have minded your own business yesterday, Maya. I told you I built an empire. You think you can just evict me? I took every dime you ever earned. You have nothing. I am moving $2 million offshore right now, and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. The bank honors my signature, not your combat boots." I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not give them the angry black woman stereotype they were desperately trying to provoke in front of the wealthy bank patrons. I simply walked right up to the counter and looked past them to the terrified teller. "Call your branch manager," I instructed her, my voice calm and authoritative. Marcus laughed loudly, stepping into my personal space. "The manager cannot help you, Maya. I have the legal documents. You are legally incapacitated according to the paperwork I filed this morning. I own you." The heavy wooden door of the back office swung open. Mr. Sterling, the regional bank manager, rushed out. He was sweating profusely, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. He did not even look at Marcus. He marched straight past the arrogant fake entrepreneur and bowed his head respectfully toward me. "Colonel Jefferson," Mr. Sterling gasped, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and absolute panic. "I am so profoundly sorry for this disturbance. We tried to stall him just as your security team requested." Marcus frowned, his arrogant smirk faltering. "Stall me? What are you talking about, Sterling? I am a premier client. Process my wire transfer right now." Mr. Sterling finally turned to Marcus, adjusting his glasses with shaking hands. "Sir, I cannot process anything. The $2 million you attempted to move was flagged the second you submitted the request." Chloe slammed her hand on the counter. "Flagged by who? He has a power of attorney." I stepped forward, locking eyes with Marcus, as his entire world began to crumble. "Flagged by the federal government," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You see, Marcus moving $2 million from the personal accounts of a high-ranking military intelligence officer requires a secondary security clearance, a clearance you do not have." The heavy glass doors of the bank shattered the quiet atmosphere as they were thrust open. 6 armed agents wearing tactical vests emblazoned with the letters FBI stormed into the lobby. The patrons gasped and scattered as the agents moved with swift military precision straight toward the VIP counter. Marcus turned around, his eyes wide with sheer terror, as 2 agents grabbed his arms and slammed him face first against the marble counter. Chloe screamed and backed away, dropping her designer purse as an agent pointed a hand toward her, ordering her to stay back. "Marcus, you are officially under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and attempting to defraud a federal military officer," the lead agent announced, snapping heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. Marcus thrashed against the marble, his cheeks squished against the cold stone. "Maya, tell them to stop. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. We are married. I have the paperwork. Mama Pat gave me her blessing. Tell them." I leaned down over the counter, bringing my face mere inches from his panicking, sweating features. I smiled, inhaling the scent of his absolute defeat. "Your power of attorney was revoked. The second I signed those divorce papers, you shoved in my face yesterday," I whispered. "You did not steal my money, Marcus. You attempted to steal federal funds linked to Vanguard Logistics. Enjoy federal prison." I watched the agents drag Marcus out of the bank lobby. Chloe scrambled out the side door, leaving him entirely to his fate. I assumed seeing Marcus hauled away in federal handcuffs would finally force my family to accept the reality of who he really was. I had underestimated my mother's delusional loyalty to the image of the perfect black family. My phone buzzed with an alert. Marcus posted bail using $250,000 in cash. Only one person was desperate enough to write that check: my mother, Patricia. She completely drained her teacher retirement fund and liquidated the church legacy savings she spent decades bragging about to the neighborhood. She sacrificed her own financial security to rescue the man who actively tried to steal from her own flesh and blood. She chose the illusion of a successful son-in-law over the reality of her daughter's survival. The real assault began the very next afternoon. I pulled my vehicle into the circular driveway of Zuri's elite private academy in Buckhead. The afternoon sun beat down on the manicured lawns as affluent parents gathered near the pickup zone. I stepped out of my car, adjusting my jacket when a sleek white luxury SUV swerved aggressively into the loading zone, blocking my path to the school gates. The passenger doors flew open. My mother, Patricia, marched out wearing her finest tailored church suit, her face twisted into a mask of righteous indignation. Right behind her strutted my sister Jasmine, clutching a designer handbag paid for by the very retirement funds my mother had just decimated to bail out a criminal. Maya Jefferson, my mother shouted, her voice carrying across the quiet courtyard, causing several wealthy parents to turn and stare. You are going to stop this ridiculous vendetta right now. You are tearing this family apart, and I will not stand by and watch you destroy a good black man just because you do not know how to be a proper wife. I stood my ground, placing myself firmly between them and the school entrance. You drained your retirement to bail out a man who tried to steal federal funds, Mother. He is facing decades in federal prison, and you are here defending him. Jasmine scoffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder. He only did what he had to do because you starved him of affection, Maya. You are a cold, calculated military machine. Mom had to bail him out because someone in this family has to protect our generational wealth. You are just a bitter woman trying to ruin everyone else because you cannot keep a man. Your generational wealth is an absolute facade, Jasmine, I replied, keeping my voice low and lethal. Marcus is broke. Chad is broke. You are wearing last season's clearance bags while our mother bankrupts herself to keep you all playing pretend. Patricia stepped directly into my personal space, pointing a manicured finger at my face. You listen to me, you ungrateful child. I spoke to Marcus's lawyers this morning. We know all about your little military deployments and the trauma you brought back with you. You are unstable, Maya. You are an unfit mother. If you do not drop these charges against Marcus and sign that house over to him, I am marching straight to the family court. I will file for grandparents' rights today. I will tell the judge about your severe military PTSD. I will testify that you are a danger to my granddaughter, and I will take Zuri away from you permanently. The surrounding parents gasped, whispering behind their hands. My mother stood tall, believing her public threat of weaponizing my military service had backed me into a corner. She expected me to break down. She expected me to beg her to keep my child. She expected the terrified little girl who used to crave her validation to surrender entirely. I did not scream. I did not flinch. I simply checked my wristwatch. You really think you can just take my child, Patricia? I asked, my voice echoing with absolute calm. You think because you hosted a few Sunday dinners, you have the power to challenge a high-ranking intelligence officer. Jasmine laughed, crossing her arms defensively. You are just a soldier, Maya. Mom has the entire church congregation ready to testify about your mental instability. You are going to lose Zuri. You are going to lose everything. Right on cue, the sound of heavy engines disrupted the quiet school pickup line. 3 massive black armored SUVs with government plates rolled smoothly into the courtyard, bypassing the standard pickup lane entirely. They parked in a tactical formation directly behind my mother's vehicle. The heavy reinforced doors swung open in unison. 6 heavily armed officers wearing sharp Judge Advocate General insignias and federal security badges stepped out onto the pavement. Their presence instantly silenced the entire courtyard. The lead officer, a towering man with a stern expression, walked straight past my mother and sister, ignoring them completely, as he approached me and offered a crisp salute. Colonel Jefferson, he announced, his voice projecting authority across the lot. The perimeter is secure. We are ready to escort your dependent safely to the compound. I returned the salute gracefully. Thank you, Captain. My mother's jaw dropped. I turned my attention back to Patricia, leaning in close so only she and Jasmine could hear my next words. Let me educate you on how federal law actually works, Mother. Harassing, intimidating, or threatening the dependents of a high-ranking federal intelligence officer is a federal offense. Attempting to file fraudulent medical claims about my mental health to a judge is perjury and extortion. If you or Jasmine take one more step toward my daughter's school, those officers will detain you for interfering with national security protocols. Now move your vehicle before I have it impounded by the Department of Defense. My mother stared at me completely speechless, trembling in absolute shock and pure undeniable terror. My mother backed away slowly, her designer heels scraping against the asphalt. She grabbed Jasmine by the arm and shoved her toward their luxury SUV, retreating in complete humiliation as the military officers escorted Zuri and me safely away. But a narcissist never truly surrenders, they just change the battlefield. By Friday evening, my phone was flooded with text messages from aunts, cousins, and church members. Patricia had initiated a full-scale social warfare campaign. She was hosting a massive traditional Sunday dinner at her house. The guest list included the most influential people in our community, from Deacon Hayes to Mother Williams, the undisputed matriarch of our church congregation. Patricia was determined to control the narrative and paint me as the villainous, aggressive military woman tearing a good black family apart. I knew exactly what she was doing, and I knew she expected me to hide in shame. Instead, I put Zuri in her best Sunday dress, wore my sharpest civilian blazer, and drove straight into the lion den. The aroma of collard greens, baked macaroni and cheese, and candied yams hit me the second I walked through my mother's front door. The dining room was packed with at least 20 people. Laughter and gospel music filled the air, but the atmosphere instantly froze when I stepped into the room holding Zuri by the hand. Sitting right at the head of the table next to my mother was Marcus. And sitting right next to him, wearing a modest floral dress she probably bought an hour ago to look respectable, was his mistress Chloe. Patricia had invited the man facing federal fraud charges and his side piece to a sacred family dinner just to humiliate me in front of the church elders. "Come on in, Maya," Patricia announced, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "We were just praying for your troubled soul. Take a seat at the end of the table." I guided Zuri to a chair, ignoring the horrified whispers of my extended family. Marcus looked incredibly smug, slicing into a piece of fried chicken, while Chloe dutifully wiped a spot of gravy from his chin. Patricia smiled approvingly at the mistress. "You know Mother Williams?" Patricia projected her voice so the entire room had to listen. "A successful black man carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. He needs a soft, nurturing woman to come home to. Someone who knows how to cater to her husband. Not a cold drill sergeant who treats her marriage like a combat zone." Chloe cast her eyes down, pretending to be modest. "It is just about respect, Mrs. Patricia. A man needs peace." Jasmine snickered from across the table, pouring herself a glass of wine. Maya forgot how to be a woman the second she joined ROTC at 18. "I remember when Dad begged you to go to charm school, Maya, but you wanted to play with guns instead. Now look at you. Pushing away a good provider because you are too rigid to be a real wife." Marcus sighed heavily, playing the ultimate wounded martyr. "I tried, Deacon Hayes, I really did. I poured my blood, sweat, and tears into building an empire for this family. But Maya is unstable. Her deployments broke her mind. She is aggressive and paranoid. I have been living in a toxic environment for years, trying to protect my daughter." I continued cutting Zuri's food, maintaining a calm, steady rhythm. "Eat your vegetables, baby," I whispered, completely ignoring the circus performing around me. My silence only infuriated them more. Chloe suddenly tapped her crystal water glass with a spoon, standing up to command the room. "Since everyone who loves this family is here today, Marcus and I have a very important announcement regarding Zuri," she said, placing a protective hand on Marcus's shoulder. "We are officially filing for full physical custody tomorrow morning." Zuri dropped her fork, her lower lip trembling. I squeezed her knee under the table, keeping my eyes locked on the mistress. Chloe smiled a terrifying, predatory grin. "Maya's military environment is entirely too toxic and unstable for a young black girl. Marcus and I are going to provide her with a traditional, loving, two-parent household. We have already selected a prestigious boarding school in Switzerland. We are going to send Zuri there to protect her from her mother's mental breakdowns and secure her generational wealth." The church elders murmured in agreement, nodding at the seemingly noble sacrifice Marcus was making. Patricia clapped her hands together, praising the Lord for sending Marcus such a devoted new partner. I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin and slowly pushed my chair back. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my smartphone. My mother had spent thousands of dollars installing a state-of-the-art Bluetooth surround sound system in her living room last Christmas. I had set it up for her so my phone was still perfectly paired to the network. Switzerland is a beautiful country. Chloe, I said, my voice slicing through the dining room chatter like a sharpened blade. But you should really learn to secure your telecommunications when you are under federal investigation. Vanguard Intelligence intercepts a lot of interesting wiretaps, Marcus. I tapped the screen on my phone. A crisp, high-definition audio recording blasted through the concealed speakers, echoing off the vaulted ceilings for every church elder and family member to hear perfectly. Marcus's voice echoed through the dining room loud and clear. As soon as we get full custody, the judge unlocks the accounts. We drain the $500,000 from the kids' college fund immediately. Chloe's voice chimed in next, dripping with greedy anticipation. Finally, I can open my luxury nail bar in Midtown. What are we going to do with the brat, though? I am not raising Maya's kid. Marcus's recorded laughter filled the room. We dump her at that cheap military reform school in Alabama. It costs barely nothing, and she will be out of our hair permanently. I paused the audio. The absolute silence in the dining room was deafening. Deacon Hayes dropped his fork onto his porcelain plate with a loud clatter. Mother Williams clutched her pearl necklace, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror. I looked at Marcus, who had turned the color of spoiled milk, and Chloe, who was shaking so hard her chair rattled against the hardwood floor. I picked up my keys and grabbed Zuri's hand. "Thanks for dinner, Mother," I said softly. It was incredibly revealing. The afternoon sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the upscale Buckhead Cafe, casting a warm glow over my table. I sat quietly stirring a cup of Earl Grey tea, savoring the rare moment of absolute silence. My military uniform was pressed sharply against the leather booth, a stark contrast to the absolute chaos my family was currently drowning in. Patricia had just learned the hard way that federal prosecutors do not play games with forged medical documents. Now it was time for the next domino to fall. The bell above the cafe door chimed aggressively. I did not even look up when the frantic clicking of high heels approached my table. The woman who slid into the booth across from me was a far cry from the arrogant, smug mistress who had stood in my foyer wearing my silk robe just a few days ago. Chloe looked entirely derailed. Her designer makeup was smudged under her eyes, and her expensive weave was tangled. She clutched a bulky faux leather handbag to her chest like a shield, panting as if she had sprinted blocks to find me. She slammed a silver flash drive onto the mahogany table right next to my teacup. The metal clattered loudly, drawing the attention of a few nearby patrons. "I need $500,000, Chloe demanded, her voice shaking with a pathetic mixture of entitlement and sheer terror. "And I need it wired to a clean account by 5 o'clock today, Maya." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. I placed the cup back on its porcelain saucer without making a single sound. "You are in a tremendous amount of danger, Chloe, to be sitting across from an active-duty intelligence officer demanding ransom." "It is not a ransom," Chloe hissed, leaning forward aggressively. "It is your salvation. Do you have any idea what Marcus has been doing behind your back for the past 5 years? He is completely broke. The man does not have 2 dimes to rub together. But he had your signature. Or at least he had a good forgery of it." I kept my face completely blank, allowing her to dig her own grave. "That flash drive contains every single digital footprint," Chloe bragged, tapping a manicured fingernail against the silver device. "Marcus has been taking out massive unrecorded loans from underground lenders. Dangerous people, Maya. Real street sharks who do not care about your little military rank. He forged your signature on every single promissory note. He laughed about it while he bought me diamond earrings and paid for my luxury car leases. He said your pristine federal credit score was the only useful thing you ever brought to the marriage. If those lenders come collecting, they will go straight to the military brass. Your career will be absolutely destroyed. $500,000 is a cheap price to pay to keep your colonel's stars." Chloe sat back, crossing her arms, expecting me to crumble. She expected the desperate black woman trope, the wife terrified of losing her hard-earned career because of a worthless man. Before I could even process a response, the heavy glass doors of the cafe flew open with enough force to rattle the window panes. Marcus stormed inside. He looked like a hunted animal. His custom suit was wrinkled, his tie was missing, and sweat poured down his forehead. He spotted us immediately and charged across the cafe, knocking a chair out of his way. "You treacherous little snake!" Marcus roared, lunging directly at Chloe. "I knew you were acting suspicious. I tracked your phone location." Marcus slammed his hands onto our table, rattling my teacup. He completely ignored me, locking his furious, bloodshot eyes on his mistress. "You are trying to sell me out to my own wife. After everything I built for us. After I promised you generational wealth." Chloe shrieked and scrambled backward in the booth, clutching her handbag. "Generational wealth, Marcus. You are facing 20 years in federal prison for wire fraud. You dragged me into your mess, and now the feds are watching my every move. I am not going down for a fake entrepreneur who cannot even pay his own car note." Marcus lunged across the mahogany table, grabbing Chloe by the collar of her blouse. She screamed wildly, thrashing against his grip and scratching her manicured nails deeply into his forearm. Blood welled up on his skin, but he did not let go. He reached frantically for the silver flash drive sitting between us. "You stupid girl." Marcus spat, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "If she gets that drive, we are both finished. The sharks will kill me." "I gave you everything," Chloe yelled back, kicking her heels under the table. "You told me she was just a dumb soldier. You told me her money was our money. Now I am being followed by unmarked cars and my accounts are frozen. Give me the drive." They wrestled over the table, a disgusting, violent display of two cheaters who had absolutely zero loyalty to anyone but themselves. They knocked over the sugar dispenser, sending white crystals spilling across the polished wood. The cafe manager shouted from behind the counter, dialing his phone for security. They were tearing each other apart right in front of me, showing the entire world exactly what kind of trash they truly were. I calmly picked up my teacup and took one final soothing sip. I stood up from the booth, adjusting the crisp lapels of my military jacket. I looked down at the two of them, grappling over a tiny piece of plastic like starving dogs fighting over a bone. Marcus managed to snatch the flash drive, holding it up triumphantly as he shoved Chloe back against the leather seat. "I got it," he panted, turning to me with a wild, deranged smile. "You get nothing, Maya. You cannot prove anything. You are going to be paying these loans off for the rest of your miserable life." I sighed, brushing a stray sugar crystal off my sleeve. I looked at Marcus, and then at the sobbing, ruined woman cowering in the booth. "I do not need your evidence, Chloe," I said, my voice carrying clearly over their heavy breathing. "And Marcus, you can keep that flash drive." Marcus frowned, his triumphant smile faltering. "What are you talking about?" I pulled my military cap from the table and tucked it under my arm. "You are not a very smart criminal, Marcus. When you took out those loans from those dangerous street lenders, you needed a clean social security number because yours has been blacklisted for 7 years. But Vanguard Intelligence sweeps my identity weekly for security clearances. If you had used my social security number, I would have been alerted the very same hour." Chloe stopped crying. Her eyes widened into massive saucers as the realization slowly dawned on her. She looked at Marcus, who had suddenly turned the color of chalk. I leaned in close, resting my hands on the table. "He did not use my social security number, Chloe," I whispered, watching the absolute horror shatter her features. "He used yours." Chloe let out a blood-curdling shriek. "You put the loans in my name," she screamed, lunging at Marcus again. I turned away from the table, leaving them to their misery. "Oh, and Chloe," I called out over my shoulder as I walked toward the cafe exit. "You might want to check the parking lot. The loan sharks and the Internal Revenue Service are waiting by your car right outside. Enjoy your generational wealth." I walked away from the cafe, leaving the chaotic mess of Marcus and Chloe behind me, and headed straight back to the sanctuary of my new luxury penthouse in Buckhead. The transition to this new space was a necessary upgrade for Zuri and me. It featured sweeping skyline views, private elevator access, and impenetrable security. Or so I thought. The private elevator chimed just past noon, signaling an approved guest. The polished steel doors slid open, and out stepped my mother, Patricia. She wore a pristine pastel suit, holding a freshly baked peach cobbler in her manicured hands. Her face was arranged in a soft, loving expression, a stark contrast to the venomous woman who had ambushed me at Zuri's school pickup just days prior. Maya, my beautiful, brilliant daughter, Patricia cooed, stepping into the massive marble foyer. She handed the cobbler to my security guard without looking at him and reached out to hug me. I took a deliberate step back, crossing my arms over my cashmere sweater. Patricia dropped her arms, but her fake smile never wavered. Her eyes darted around the penthouse, taking in the original artwork, the custom Italian furniture, and the sheer magnitude of my actual financial status. Word had clearly reached her about Vanguard Logistics. The realization that her scapegoat daughter was quietly sitting on a $1 billion empire had forced a rapid change in her tactical approach. "I see the Lord has truly blessed you, Maya." Patricia said, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that made my skin crawl. "This place is simply magnificent. It brings joy to my spirit to see a Black woman achieving such immense success. I always knew you had greatness in you, even when you were being stubborn as a teenager." I stared at her, letting the heavy silence stretch between us. "You are not here to admire my interior design, mother. You bypassed my security detail because you used the emergency family code I set up years ago. What do you want?" Patricia let out a theatrical sigh, placing a hand over her heart. "Cannot a mother visit her eldest child?" "I came to apologize, Maya. We let misunderstandings divide us. But family is family. Blood is thicker than any argument. I want to make things right between us. I want us to be a united front again." I gestured toward the formal sitting room. "State your business, Patricia. I have a very tight schedule today." She followed me to the plush velvet sofas, sitting down and smoothing her skirt. She leaned forward, adopting a hushed, conspiratorial tone. "Maya, our family is facing a crisis. A genuine crisis that threatens everything we represent in this community. Chad's real estate business has completely collapsed since you pulled your funding. Jasmine is facing utter destitution. And Marcus is looking at decades in federal prison unless he can mount a massive legal defense. Our family name is being dragged through the mud." I poured myself a glass of sparkling water. "That sounds like a collection of consequences for their own actions, none of which involves me." Patricia slammed her hand against the velvet cushion. "It involves all of us, Maya. You have built an incredible fortune. You possess real generational wealth. But generational wealth means nothing if you do not use it to uplift your own people. You cannot sit up here in this ivory tower while your sister loses her home and your husband goes to jail. You have a moral obligation to protect the family name. We need $10 million, Maya. 5 to pay off Chad's debts and 5 for Marcus's legal team. It is a drop in the bucket for you." I set my glass down with a sharp clink against the glass coffee table. "You want me to liquidate $10 million of my assets to save the white man who mocks my existence and the fake entrepreneur who tried to steal from me. You want me to fund the very people who actively conspired to destroy my life. The answer is no, Patricia. Not a single dime." The sweet motherly facade vanished instantly. Patricia's face contorted into a mask of pure, unfiltered hatred. She unclasped her designer purse and pulled out a thick manila folder, tossing it onto the coffee table. "I tried to do this the nice way," she hissed. "I tried to appeal to your sense of duty. But you have always been a cold, arrogant machine. You think your money makes you untouchable. Look at that folder, Maya. I did not touch it." "What is this?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. Patricia leaned back, crossing her legs with a triumphant smirk. "Those are psychiatric evaluations from 2 prominent medical professionals in our church community. They detail your severe military-induced trauma, your violent outbursts, your paranoia, and your complete inability to function as a safe, capable mother to Zuri." I raised an eyebrow. "I have never been evaluated by anyone in your church, Patricia." "It does not matter," she spat. "The signatures are on the official letterhead. The diagnoses are heavily documented. I am prepared to walk straight into family court tomorrow morning and hand these documents to a judge. I will testify that you have threatened me, that you isolate your daughter, and that your military deployment severely damaged your psychological state. You will lose custody of Zuri before the weekend. The state will place her with me. And as her legal guardian, I will file for immediate child support and asset reallocation from your estate. You will fund this family one way or another." I looked at the forged medical documents and then back at the woman who gave birth to me. You are willing to commit a felony and take my child away just to fund Jasmine's lifestyle and Marcus's legal fees. I am willing to do whatever it takes to protect my legacy. Patricia declared, her chin raised high. Now transfer the $10 million today, or say goodbye to your daughter. I did not scream. I did not show an ounce of the fear she desperately wanted to see. I simply stood up and walked toward the hallway leading to my home office. Where are you going? Patricia demanded, jumping to her feet. You cannot walk away from this, Maya. I hold all the cards. I stopped with my hand on the brass doorknob of my office. You always had a terrible habit of underestimating my intelligence, Mother. I opened the heavy double doors wide, revealing the interior of my spacious home office. Sitting comfortably around my mahogany conference table were two federal prosecutors from the United States Attorney's Office and a senior investigator from the Department of Child Protective Services. They had high-graded audio recording equipment actively running on the table. Patricia, the lead federal prosecutor, said, standing up and adjusting his suit jacket. We have been listening to your entire conversation through the wired microphones in the sitting room. The color drained entirely from Patricia's face. She stumbled backward, clutching her chest as her designer purse hit the floor. What is this? She gasped. I stepped aside, gesturing into the room. You just walked into a federal trap, Patricia, I said coldly. You delivered forged medical documents across state lines to extort a military officer. You threatened the welfare of a minor to secure financial gain. You just committed medical forgery, blackmail, and federal extortion on tape. Enjoy your legacy. The heavy oak doors of the mediation room snapped shut, sealing Marcus and his high-priced attorney inside with my legal counsel and me. I sat perfectly upright in my tailored civilian suit, the satisfaction of watching my mother led away in federal handcuffs still keeping my blood warm. Patricia was currently facing the reality of extortion charges, leaving Marcus completely isolated to fight his own battles. He clearly felt the pressure. He sat across the polished mahogany table, sweating profusely, but attempting to project the aura of an untouchable corporate titan. To mask his absolute financial ruin, Marcus had hired Vance Montgomery, a ruthless divorce attorney known for viciously dismantling spouses in high-profile Atlanta settlements. Vance did not even wait for the court-appointed mediator to finish reading the preliminary guidelines. He tossed a thick binder onto the center of the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the sterile room. My client is prepared to be generous. Vance began, his voice dripping with condescension as he adjusted his custom silk tie. We understand Colonel Jefferson has a demanding and highly stressful military career. Because Marcus is a deeply forgiving man who values the sanctity of the family, he is willing to settle this matter quickly today. We are formally demanding 50% ownership of Vanguard Logistics and Properties. We also require a permanent lifetime alimony structure of $40,000 a month and primary physical custody of their daughter Zuri. I did not flinch. I kept my hands folded neatly on the table. My own attorney, Mr. Carter, an elite corporate litigator who specialized in protecting high-net-worth military personnel, remained completely silent, letting the shark swim blindly into the shallow water. 50% of $1 billion defense and real estate firm, I asked, my tone flat and conversational. And lifetime alimony for a man who has not contributed a single successful paycheck to our household in 8 years. Marcus slammed his fist against the table, leaning forward with a fabricated expression of deep emotional pain. You owe me, Maya. I sacrificed my own prime earning years to hold our household together while you were playing soldier in foreign countries. Do you have any idea what it does to a proud, successful black man to sit alone in an empty house waiting for a wife who cares more about the government than her own marriage? You abandoned your duties. Your constant deployments caused me severe emotional distress. I could not focus on building my empire because I was too busy managing the psychological trauma of your absence. You starved me of affection and stability. That company you built using federal connections should be our generational wealth. I earned half of it simply by enduring your neglect. Vance Montgomery nodded in agreement, flipping open his binder to a specific page. The psychological toll on my client is heavily documented. We have extensive files proving that your military career actively obstructed his earning potential. Because you failed to provide a traditional supportive environment, Marcus was unable to secure venture capital for his consulting firm. You actively suppressed his financial growth. Therefore, marital law dictates that he is entitled to a massive portion of the wealth you accumulated during the marriage to offset his losses. If you do not sign these settlement papers today, we will drag your name through the mud in a public trial. We will subpoena your commanding officers and expose your lack of maternal dedication. The mediator looked at me expecting outrage. They expected the angry stereotype they could weaponize for the court record. They wanted me to raise my voice to validate their ridiculous narrative of my supposed aggression. Instead, I slowly turned to my attorney. Mr. Carter offered a polite, chilling smile. He reached into his slim leather briefcase and retrieved a single piece of thick parchment paper. He did not slide a massive binder across the table. He simply pushed that one crisp document toward Vance Montgomery. "That is a fascinating narrative," Counselor Carter said, his voice smooth and deadly. "However, it relies entirely on a fundamental misunderstanding of corporate structure and marital asset law." Vance frowned, picking up the document. "What is this?" "That is the foundational charter for Vanguard Logistics and Properties," Carter explained, leaning back in his leather chair. "You see, Marcus assumed that because his wife is wealthy, he automatically hit the jackpot. He assumed Vanguard was a standard limited liability company established during the marriage using marital funds. He assumed wrong." Marcus wiped a bead of sweat from his temple, looking nervously at his lawyer. Vance was reading the document, his face rapidly losing all color. His arrogant posture deflated like a punctured balloon. "Vanguard is not a standard corporation. Maya owns." Carter continued, spelling it out slowly for the desperate man across the table. "Vanguard is structured as a highly classified blind trust. Furthermore, it was not established by Colonel Jefferson. It was established by a 4-star general, her former commanding officer, exactly 2 years before she ever met Marcus. The trust was designed to handle classified logistics contracts and manage acquired real estate assets under military oversight." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the mahogany surface, and looked directly into Marcus' terrified eyes. "I do not own the company assets, Marcus," I said softly, ensuring every syllable hit him like a physical blow. "I am the sole designated beneficiary and operational director of a pre-existing trust. The assets belong to the trust, not to me personally. And according to federal law and the bulletproof ironclad charter you are looking at right now, assets held within a blind trust established prior to a marriage are completely exempt from marital division." Vance Montgomery dropped the paper onto the table, his hands actually shaking. He looked at Marcus with pure, unfiltered fury, realizing his client had lied to him about the nature of the assets and guaranteed a massive loss. "You get absolutely nothing, Marcus," I stated, my voice echoing with finality in the quiet room. "No company shares, no lifetime alimony, no generational wealth to steal. You walked into this marriage with nothing but a cheap suit and a bad attitude, and that is exactly how you are walking out." Marcus stared at the paper, his breathing shallow and erratic. The grand illusion of his power was entirely shattered. He had gambled his entire future on my destruction and lost everything. Vance Montgomery was a predator, and predators do not simply roll over when they lose the scent of blood. The shark attorney quickly snatched the Vanguard charter off the mahogany table, shoving it back into his thick binder. He cleared his throat, adjusting his custom suit jacket as he desperately pivoted to his contingency plan. "If the assets are protected by a pre-existing blind trust, then we must pivot to the liabilities," Vance stated, his voice regaining its usual arrogant edge. "My client entered this marriage with excellent credit and immense entrepreneurial potential. During the 8 years of this union, he accumulated significant debt to maintain the marital lifestyle while Colonel Jefferson was constantly deployed. Therefore, we demand that Colonel Jefferson absorb 100% of the marital debt." Marcus sat up straighter. The color slowly returned to his face. The sheer terror of walking away empty-handed was quickly replaced by the malicious realization that he could still inflict massive financial damage on me. "That is right," Marcus chimed in, leaning back in his chair with a sickeningly familiar smirk. I racked up those credit cards paying for household repairs and keeping our social standing afloat while you were overseas playing G.I. Joe. I had to fund my consulting firm out of pocket because my wife refused to support black entrepreneurship. The debt was incurred during the marriage. You are the billionaire Maya. You pay for it. I am walking away clean. He crossed his arms, looking at me with pure, unadulterated triumph. He genuinely believed he had found the ultimate loophole. He thought he could dump years of reckless spending, fake luxury car leases, and expensive gifts for his mistress directly into my lap. He expected me to be furious. He expected me to yell and scream about the injustice of paying for his infidelity. I did not raise my voice. I did not even blink. I simply turned my head slightly toward my attorney. Mr. Carter offered a polite, chilling smile. He reached into his slim leather briefcase for the second time today. He did not pull out a stack of financial affidavits. He produced a single heavily stapled commercial lease agreement and pushed it smoothly across the polished table. Counselor, your client seems to have a severe misunderstanding of who actually funded his fake entrepreneurial lifestyle, Carter said, his voice smooth and razor-sharp. Marcus Jefferson Consulting has been operating out of a premium suite in the Midtown Financial Tower for the past 6 years. He also leased over $200,000 in high-end computer equipment, servers, and custom office furniture. Vance frowned, picking up the heavy document. What does his commercial lease have to do with the marital debt division? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and locked eyes with the man who had spent a decade trying to make me feel small. It has everything to do with it, Marcus, I said, keeping my tone conversational but lethal. You always loved bragging about your corner office. You loved telling my mother and the entire church congregation how you negotiated such a stellar commercial lease without any help from your military wife. You mocked my government salary while you sat in that leather executive chair. Marcus swallowed hard, his smug smirk faltering. I negotiated a great deal. My landlord respects my business vision. Your landlord is Zenith Commercial Properties. I corrected him, watching the exact moment the realization hit his eyes. Zenith Commercial Properties is a direct subsidiary of Vanguard Logistics. I am your landlord, Marcus. I have been your landlord for 6 years. Vance Montgomery dropped the lease agreement onto the table as if it had physically burned him. He looked at Marcus with absolute disgust. You see, Marcus, I continued, my voice echoing in the dead silent mediation room. You have not paid your commercial rent in 11 months. You defaulted on the equipment leases entirely. You thought you were dodging a faceless corporate entity while you spent your revenue on luxury vacations for Chloe. But my property managers were simply documenting every single missed payment, every late fee, and every breach of contract under my direct orders. Marcus began to shake. His chest heaved as he stared at the lease agreement bearing his own forged signature, the signature he used when he lied about his corporate revenue to secure the suite. According to the penalty clauses in the contract you signed, Carter interjected, tapping a manicured finger against the specific page, you are in catastrophic breach. The acceleration clause was triggered the moment you filed for divorce, attempting to defraud the parent company owner. You are personally liable for the remaining 10 years of the commercial lease, the unreturned equipment, and the compounding punitive damages. How much? Marcus gasped, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. How much do I owe? I leaned back in my chair, smoothing the lapels of my tailored suit. You owe Vanguard Logistics exactly $4 million, I stated clearly. And because this is a verified corporate debt, resulting from documented fraud and breach of contract, it cannot be discharged in standard bankruptcy. Vance Montgomery aggressively packed his legal pads into his briefcase. He did not say a word to Marcus. The ruthless shark attorney realized his client had just made him look like an absolute amateur in front of an elite corporate litigator. Vance stood up, zipped his bag, and walked out of the mediation room without a single backward glance, abandoning Marcus completely. Maya, please, Marcus begged, tears welling up in his eyes as his entire fake empire crumbled into dust. You cannot do this to me. I will go to prison. I will be working for the rest of my life just to pay the interest. We are family. We share a daughter. You cannot garnish my wages forever. I stood up, buttoning my jacket with precise military efficiency. I looked down at the pathetic broken man sitting alone at the massive mahogany table. "I am not doing anything to you, Marcus," I replied, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "I am simply holding you accountable to the contracts you signed. You wanted to be a successful businessman. Now you get to experience the reality of corporate liabilities. My financial team will be filing the garnishment orders with the state by tomorrow morning. Every paycheck you ever earn for the rest of your natural life will belong to Vanguard." I turned and walked out of the mediation room, the sharp click of my heels masking the sound of Marcus sobbing into his hands. He wanted to leave me with his debts, but he had just secured himself a lifelong financial prison of his own making. The financial destruction of my ex-husband was finalized, but my mother Patricia still believed she could win. Labor Day weekend arrived, bringing with it the annual community cookout at the historic neighborhood park. This event was the social pinnacle for our church congregation and the local African American elite. Patricia was currently facing serious federal extortion charges, but she was determined to use this gathering to paint herself as a frail, persecuted matriarch. She wanted to turn the entire neighborhood against me before her trial date. I arrived at the park precisely at 2. I did not wear a casual sundress or a simple t-shirt. I wore my immaculate Army Colonel dress uniform, the crisp fabric adorned with every medal and ribbon I had earned over 2 decades of service. I did not come alone either. 2 high-ranking military police officers walked on my right while my private Vanguard security detail flanked my left. The scent of barbecue ribs and smoked brisket hung thick in the humid Atlanta air, but the lively music and loud chatter died the second my tactical boots hit the paved walkway. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me. Patricia was holding court near the main pavilion, surrounded by sympathetic church elders. She was holding a tissue to her eyes, playing the weeping victim perfectly. Her performance shattered the moment she saw me. She dropped the tissue, her mouth opening in silent outrage. Before Patricia could even formulate a lie, my sister Jasmine stormed through the crowd. Jasmine was no longer draped in the latest designer brands. Her hair was unstyled, and she wore a cheap, faded dress. The reality of Chad losing his entire real estate portfolio had hit her hard. She marched right up to my security perimeter, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You just could not stay away, could you?" Jasmine screamed, her voice echoing across the quiet park. "You had to come here and rub your money and your rank in our faces. You ruined my life, Maya. You took his business and left us with absolutely nothing." I looked at my sister, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "I did not take anything, Jasmine. Your husband committed financial fraud and lost his own business. I simply refused to let him steal mine." "You always thought you were too good for this family," Jasmine yelled, tears of furious humiliation streaming down her cheeks. "Even when we were kids, you looked down on us. You ran off to join the military because you thought putting on that uniform made you better than a regular black woman. Mom was right about you. You abandoned your own blood to serve a government that does not even care about you. You punished me and Chad because you were jealous of my perfect marriage." "There is nothing perfect about a marriage built on stolen money and racial hatred, Jasmine," I replied, my voice carrying loud enough for the church elders to hear. A harsh, drunken laugh erupted from behind the barbecue grills. Chad stumbled forward, holding a half-empty beer bottle. His face was red and his shirt was stained with grease. The slick, arrogant real estate broker was completely gone, replaced by a bitter, unhinged drunk. "Listen to the high and mighty soldier," Chad slurred, pushing his way past a group of startled teenagers. "You think you are so smart with your little shell companies and your military bodyguards. You think you can just destroy a successful man like me." "Sir, step back," a military police officer warned, raising a hand to block Chad from getting any closer. Chad ignored the officer, throwing his beer bottle onto the grass. It shattered, spraying glass everywhere. He lunged forward aggressively, trying to physically close the distance between us. He glared at me, his face twisted with pure drunken malice. "You are nothing but a rich ghetto animal." Chad spat, his voice viciously loud, cutting through the heavy summer air. The entire park erupted in gasps of sheer horror. The church elders covered their mouths. Patricia froze, completely paralyzed by the blatant, undisguised racism her beloved white son-in-law had just unleashed in front of the entire black community. He tried to grab the lapel of my uniform. He never even made contact. My Vanguard security lead stepped in with lightning speed. He grabbed Chad by the wrist, twisting his arm sharply behind his back. A sickening pop echoed over the grass. Chad shrieked in agony, dropping to his knees as the security officer pinned him effortlessly to the ground. "Keep your filthy hands off a United States military officer," the security lead growled, shoving Chad face into the dirt. Jasmine screamed, clutching her head in panic, but nobody in the crowd moved to help her husband. The community had just witnessed the ugly racist truth behind the man Patricia had protected and praised for years. I stepped over Chad's writhing body and walked directly toward my mother. Patricia was trembling violently, clutching the edge of a picnic table for support. The sympathetic audience she had gathered was now glaring at her, utterly disgusted by the monster she had brought into their community. "You wanted to talk about family legacy today, Mother," I announced, projecting my voice so every single person in the park could hear the final judgment, destroying our history. "Well, let's talk about the ancestral home you loved bragging about, the house my grandparents built." Patricia swallowed hard, her eyes darting around wildly. "What about the house Maya? You took out a massive secret mortgage on that historic property to fund Jasmine's lavish lifestyle and pay Chad legal retainers," I stated clearly, exposing her deepest financial secret. "You defaulted on that loan 3 months ago. The bank quietly foreclosed on it last week. You lost our family history because you were funding a racist fraud." The church elders gasped, shaking their heads in profound disappointment. Patricia buried her face in her hands, sobbing loudly as the ultimate shame washed over her. "But do not worry, Mother," I continued, my voice turning to ice. "The bank put it up for auction this morning. I bought the house back entirely in cash. Vanguard Logistics owns the ancestral home now, which means I am officially your landlord." Patricia looked up, her tear-streaked face filled with absolute terror. "And as your landlord," I added calmly, "I am serving you with a formal eviction notice. You have exactly 30 days to vacate my property." The silence that followed my announcement stretched across the park, hanging heavy in the humid Atlanta air. The church elders watched with bated breath as the reality of the foreclosure settled over the picnic tables. I stood perfectly still, my Vanguard security detail securing the perimeter around me and my daughter Zuri. Patricia stared at me. Her tear-streaked face underwent a terrifyingly rapid transformation. The absolute panic that had gripped her features melted away, replaced in an instant by a manufactured, overwhelming relief. In her twisted, narcissistic mind, she completely ignored the words eviction notice. She only heard that the house had been purchased by her own flesh and blood. To a woman who had spent her entire life manipulating family loyalty to secure her survival. This was not a defeat. This was a rescue. "Oh, praise the Lord!" Patricia wailed, throwing her hands toward the sky in a dramatic display of religious fervor. She stumbled forward, pushing past Deacon Hayes, and lunged toward me with her arms spread wide. My baby girl, my prodigal daughter, returned to save her family. My security lead stepped forward to intercept her, but I raised a single hand, commanding him to hold his position. I let Patricia close the distance, refusing to step back, as she threw her arms around my stiff shoulders. She squeezed me tightly, pressing her cheek against my military uniform, sobbing loudly enough for the entire congregation to hear. "I knew it!" Patricia cried out, turning her head to address the crowd of onlookers while still clinging to me. I knew God would touch her heart. The Lord works in mysterious ways. He sent my eldest daughter away to build her wealth so she could return and protect our generational legacy. She bought our ancestral home back. She forgave her mother. Look at the healing power of the Black family. A few of the older church members nodded, murmuring agreements and amens, completely buying into her sudden theatrical redemption arc. Jasmine, who had been sobbing into her hands just moments ago, suddenly wiped her face and stood up straighter. The entitlement rushed back into her posture like a tidal wave. She adjusted her cheap, faded dress and let out a loud, arrogant sigh of relief. "Well, it is about time you did something useful for this family." Maya Jasmine scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "You had me worried there for a second, but honestly, since you are the new landlord, you need to send a contractor over to fix the plumbing in the master bathroom. Chad and I cannot be expected to raise our future kids in a house with leaky pipes." Chad, brushing the dirt off his grease-stained shirt after my security guard had pinned him, chuckled and rubbed his sore wrist. He looked at me with that same condescending racist smirk he had worn since the day he married my sister. Good looking out, sister-in-law. Chad slurred, swaying slightly on his feet. I guess all that aggressive military training paid off after all. Keeping the real estate in the family portfolio is a smart financial move. I can even manage the property for you. Cut me 10% of the phantom equity, and we will call it even for this little misunderstanding today. I gently but firmly reached up and peeled my mother's arms off my shoulders. I pushed Patricia back, creating a wide, deliberate gap between us. I looked at Chad, then at Jasmine, and finally locked eyes with my mother. You severely misunderstood my previous statement. I said, my voice carrying a lethal calm that instantly killed the rising murmurs of the crowd. I am not your savior, Patricia. I did not buy that house to protect your image or to provide a free luxury ride for a bankrupt racist and a spoiled sister. Patricia forced a nervous laugh, reaching for my hand again. Maya, do not play games right now. The elders are watching. You said you bought the house. You saved our home. I bought the house, I corrected her smoothly. But I did not buy it for you. I turned my back on Patricia and scanned the crowd of faces. My eyes searched past the gossip mongers and the judgmental church ladies until I found the one person I had actually come to see. Sitting quietly on a wooden bench at the edge of the pavilion holding a plate of untouched barbecue was Aunt Sarah. Aunt Sarah was my father's older sister. She was a quiet, dignified woman who worked 30 years as a night shift nurse. She never wore designer clothes. She never bragged about her bank account. But 20 years ago, when Patricia drained my college savings to buy Jasmine a new car, it was Aunt Sarah who quietly handed me an envelope of cash to pay for my textbooks. When Patricia locked me out of the house because I refused to skip a military training exercise to babysit Jasmine, it was Aunt Sarah who left her porch light on and made up a bed for me. Aunt Sarah, I called out, my voice softening with genuine respect. Could you come here, please? The crowd parted immediately, creating a clear path for the older woman. Aunt Sarah stood up, smoothing her modest cotton dress, and walked slowly toward the center of the pavilion. She looked at Patricia with a weary expression, then turned her kind eyes to me. Yes, baby, she asked, her voice steady and warm. I unbuttoned the breast pocket of my dress uniform and pulled out a thick, folded legal document sealed with a heavy gold notary stamp. I took Aunt Sarah's weathered hands in mine and placed the document gently into her palms. When the bank foreclosed on the ancestral home this week, I purchased it completely in cash. I explained loudly, ensuring every single person in the park could hear the undeniable truth. But Vanguard Logistics did not retain the title. I transferred the deed this morning. The house is completely paid off, free and clear forever, and it is entirely in your name, Aunt Sarah. Aunt Sarah gasped, looking down at the legal deed. Her hands began to tremble. Maya, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I cannot accept this. It is too much. You earned it decades ago, Auntie, I said, squeezing her hands. You were the only person who protected me when I was a child. You provided shelter when the woman standing behind me chose her own vanity over her daughter's survival. That house holds our family history, and it belongs to the only woman who actually understands what family means. Patricia let out a blood-curdling shriek. No, she screamed, lunging forward, trying to snatch the document from Aunt Sarah's hands. My security lead blocked her instantly, shoving her back roughly. That is my house, Patricia wailed, her face contorted in pure, unadulterated panic. My father built that house. You cannot give it to her. She is not the matriarch. I am the matriarch. You are a squatter, Patricia, I stated, my voice dropping to a freezing temperature. You mortgaged your father's legacy to fund a fake empire. You lost the house. Aunt Sarah owns it now. Jasmine stomped her foot on the grass, hysterical. You cannot do this, Maya. Where are we supposed to go? Chad has no money. We are broke. You cannot put us on the street. I turned to face my sister, my mother, and the racist brother-in-law who had mocked my existence for years. I looked at their terrified, pathetic faces and felt absolute peace. Earlier I said, you had 30 days to vacate my property, I announced, projecting my voice with military authority. But since I am no longer the landlord, I cannot enforce that timeline. Aunt Sarah is the legal owner of the premises now. And knowing how highly she values a peaceful environment, I strongly suggest you start packing. I checked my watch, the gold dial glinting in the late afternoon sun. The eviction notice has been officially modified, I declared, staring directly into Patricia's horrified eyes. The house belongs to Auntie now. Patricia, Jasmine, and Chad, you have exactly until sunset to pack your bags and leave her property. If you are still trespassing on her land when it gets dark, Vanguard Security will physically remove you. Enjoy the rest of the cookout. I walked away. Vanguard Security escorted them off the property at sunset. They shoved their designer luggage into Chad's broken-down rental car while the neighbors watched. But Jasmine refused to accept defeat quietly. Stripped of her luxury, she decided to monetize her victimhood. She reached out to Atlanta Tea, a notorious gossip blog. She sold them a completely fabricated story painting herself as a martyr. By Tuesday morning, my phone was vibrating off the table. The headline read, "Evil Rich Military Sister Destroys Black Love and Abuses Elderly Mother." Jasmine gave an exclusive interview crying about how I stole our ancestral home to throw my fragile mother onto the street. The blog painted me as a cold, unfeeling military machine who abandoned her community for corporate greed. The post went viral in hours. The comments section was a cesspool of hatred. People called me a traitor to my race, a bitter, lonely woman, and a corporate predator. Patricia and Jasmine fueled the fire by sharing the article, adding fake prayers for my troubled soul. I did not respond. I knew engaging with gossip bloggers only gave them validation. I instructed my Vanguard public relations team to remain silent. But the bloggers wanted a reaction and decided to cross the ultimate boundary to get one. Wednesday afternoon, I received a frantic call from the headmistress of Zuri Private Academy. Aggressive reporters and gossip bloggers had bypassed the campus security gate. When Zuri class walked to the gymnasium, the paparazzi ambushed them. Grown adults shoved microphones and flashing cameras into the face of my 9-year-old daughter. They screamed questions at her, asking why her mother was abusing her grandmother and if she felt safe living with a monster. Zuri was absolutely terrified. The sudden noise and aggression triggered a severe panic attack. She collapsed on the pavement, hyperventilating while the cameras kept flashing. I arrived at the school with my military police escort in 10 minutes. The bloggers were still lurking near the front gates. I ignored them completely, marching straight into the headmistress' office where Zuri was curled up on a leather sofa, trembling and clutching a cup of water. I pulled my daughter into my arms, holding her tightly until her breathing slowed. I promised her no one would ever ambush her like that again. And when I make a promise to my child, I deliver. I did not issue a tearful press release or go on a daytime talk show. I drove Zuri back to the safety of our penthouse and opened my laptop. I called Mr. Carter, my corporate litigator, and instructed him to track down the financial structure of Atlanta Tea. It took Vanguard Intelligence 2 hours to map the network. The gossip blog was owned by a digital media conglomerate called Apex Broadcasting. Apex was struggling with a drop in advertising revenue and desperate for capital. They were publicly traded and highly vulnerable. I did not just sue the blog. I weaponized Vanguard's immense capital reserves and initiated a hostile corporate takeover of Apex Broadcasting. By Thursday morning, I had purchased the controlling share of the parent company. I was officially the majority shareholder and the highest authority over every publication they operated. I drove straight to the downtown headquarters of Apex Broadcasting. I wore my sharpest tailored suit and walked into the executive boardroom, flanked by my security detail. The chief executive officer and the lead editor of Atlanta Tea were sitting at the conference table looking incredibly smug. They thought I was there to beg for a retraction. They thought they had backed a powerful military officer into a corner. "Sit down," I commanded, slicing through their arrogant smiles. "I am not here to negotiate. I am here to restructure my new asset." The lead editor frowned. "What are you talking about, Maya? You do not own anything here. We hold the power of the press." Mr. Carter slid a stack of certified financial documents across the glass table. "Actually, Colonel Jefferson acquired 60% of Apex Broadcasting at 9 o'clock this morning." Carter explained, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "She is the newly appointed chairwoman of the board, conducting an executive performance review." The blood drained from the editor's face. The chief executive stared at the acquisition documents, his hands shaking uncontrollably. They realized they had handed the bear the keys to their entire livelihood. Jasmine thought she could use your platform to destroy my peace, I said, leaning over the table. She thought I would fight her in the mud, but I do not argue with gossip bloggers. I buy them. You authorized an ambush on a 9-year-old child at her school. You caused my daughter to have a panic attack just to generate clicks for a failing website. The editor tried to stutter out an apology, claiming they did not know the reporters would target a child. I raised my hand, silencing him instantly. You are fired, I stated coldly. You are terminated immediately for gross professional misconduct and violating journalistic ethics. Security will escort you to clear out your desk right now. I turned to the sweating chief executive. And you will publish a full, unedited retraction of that fabricated story on the front page of every digital platform you control within 24 hours. You will issue a public apology to my daughter. If you fail to meet those terms, I will liquidate this subsidiary and you will be unemployed by Friday. Do I make myself clear? The chief executive nodded frantically, agreeing to my terms. I walked out of the boardroom, leaving them in complete shock. They wanted a story about an evil rich sister. I gave them a lesson on absolute corporate dominance. The public apology to my daughter was published exactly 12 hours later. The internet quickly forgot the fabricated story, moving on to the next scandal, but the silence that followed in my life was profound. Jasmine had finally learned that playing games with Vanguard intelligence resulted in total annihilation. I had secured my peace. But peace is a fragile thing when you are dealing with narcissists who have nothing left to lose. While I was restructuring media conglomerates and expanding my corporate footprint, my ex-husband was discovering the harsh reality of life without my military paycheck. Marcus had hit absolute rock bottom. His fraudulent consulting firm was liquidated to pay the $4 million he owed my company. His custom-tailored suits had been pawned just to afford basic groceries. Because of his felony fraud charges and destroyed credit, the only employment he could secure was working the graveyard shift as a janitor at a discount grocery store. He was sleeping in the back seat of a beat-up sedan he bought for $500. The luxurious lifestyle he had flaunted at my expense was completely obliterated. Even his devoted mistress had abandoned ship. The moment the Internal Revenue Service showed up at Chloe's luxury apartment looking for the taxes on the loans Marcus had fraudulently secured in her name, she packed a single duffel bag and fled the state. She left him to rot in the mess they had created together. The grand illusion of the successful black entrepreneur was dead. I knew his exact whereabouts because my Vanguard security detail monitored his movements to ensure he stayed far away from Zuri and me. We had a strict federal protection order in place. But desperate men do not care about court orders. They only care about regaining control. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was working late at Vanguard headquarters, finalizing the blueprints for a new veteran housing project. I packed my briefcase and took the private executive elevator down to the secured underground parking garage. The concrete space was brightly lit and heavily monitored, but as I approached my armored SUV, I noticed a shadow shift behind a concrete pillar. Marcus stepped out, blocking my path to the driver's side door. I stopped immediately, maintaining a safe distance. He looked entirely unrecognizable. His face was unshaven and gaunt. He wore a stained gray uniform shirt bearing the logo of the grocery store where he mopped floors. He smelled of cheap, stale coffee and desperation. He had managed to slip past the outer delivery gate by following a catering truck inside. Maya, he said, his voice raspy and shaking. Please do not call security. I just need 5 minutes to talk. I did not reach for my phone. I kept my posture perfectly straight, observing him with the same detached calculation I would use on an enemy combatant. You are violating a federal restraining order, Marcus. You have exactly 10 seconds to step away from my vehicle. I ignored my warning, taking a tentative step forward. He held his hands up, palms facing outward as if trying to show he meant no harm. He tried to summon that old manipulative charm, the smooth-talking cadence he used to use to gaslight me, but it completely failed. I know you are angry, Maya, he pleaded, forcing a pitiful smile. I know I made some mistakes, but I have been doing a lot of thinking in that car. I have been reflecting on our marriage. And I realize that I understand why you lashed out at me. I know your military deployments messed up your mind. You came back from Syria so rigid and damaged. I had to look elsewhere for affection because you were emotionally unavailable. You pushed me away. I was standing in a damp parking garage wearing a janitor shirt and still trying to blame my military service for his infidelity and financial crimes. The audacity was almost fascinating. But I am willing to look past all of that. Marcus continued, taking another step closer. I forgive you, Maya. I forgive you for taking my business and humiliating me in front of the community. I know you only did it because you were hurting. But we can fix this. We are a black family. We belong together. Zuri needs her father. If you just drop the charges and give me access to the accounts again, I will move back in. I will take you back. We can rebuild our empire. He actually believed his own delusion. He thought offering me his forgiveness would somehow erase the fact that he tried to steal my wealth and ruin my child's future. He thought the successful billionaire woman standing in front of him was still the exhausted soldier who used to beg for his basic respect. I did not argue with him. I did not waste a single breath explaining how pathetic he sounded. I simply looked at him and smiled. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my car keys. I did not press the unlock button. I pressed the small red panic button on the side of the Vanguard key fob. It did not trigger a loud car alarm. It triggered a silent alert directly to the Tactical Security Command Center located exactly 2 floors above us. Marcus frowned, looking confused by my silence. Maya, did you hear me? I said I forgive you. I heard you, Marcus, I replied, my voice echoing coldly off the concrete walls. And I do not care at all. Before Marcus could even open his mouth to respond, the heavy steel doors of the parking garage stairwell flew open. 4 Vanguard tactical security officers flooded the concrete floor, moving with terrifying speed. They did not shout warnings. They tackled Marcus from behind, driving him face first into the hard concrete floor. Marcus screamed in shock as his arms were wrenched violently behind his back. Heavy steel handcuffs clicked securely around his wrists. He thrashed against the ground, looking up at me with wild, terrified eyes. Maya, what are you doing? He shrieked, spitting dust from his mouth. Tell them to let me go. I am your husband. I forgave you. I walked casually past his pinned body toward my SUV. I opened the driver door and tossed my briefcase onto the passenger seat. I looked down at the man who had tried to destroy me. You violated a federal protection order, Marcus restated clearly. My security team is detaining you until the federal marshals arrive. You are going back to prison, and this time you do not have a mother-in-law to drain her retirement account for your bail. I climbed into my vehicle, started the engine, and drove out of the garage, leaving him screaming on the cold concrete floor. I pulled out of the parking garage and merged onto the wet Atlanta streets, leaving Marcus exactly where he belonged. The federal marshals would handle him from there. My phone buzzed against the center console. It was an unknown number. I normally ignored unrecognized calls, but Vanguard Intelligence had already flagged the device. It was a burner phone purchased from a convenience store just 2 hours ago. I answered it, keeping my eyes on the road. Maya, please do not hang up. The voice on the other end was frantic and raw, entirely stripped of its usual arrogance. It was my sister Jasmine. You have exactly 30 seconds to explain how you bypassed my blocked contacts, Jasmine, I said, my voice flat. Chad is gone, she sobbed, her breathing shallow and erratic. He packed a bag while I was asleep and took the last of the cash we had hidden. He took my wedding ring, Maya. He left me at a roadside motel near the interstate. I have absolutely nothing. My cards are declining. Mom will not answer my calls because her own lawyers told her to cut ties with us. Please, Maya, I am begging you. I just need to talk. I pulled my SUV up to a red light. I could hear the desperate panic in her voice. The golden child had finally been discarded by the very people she worshipped. I sent a quick command to my security team to trace the burner phone location. I will give you exactly 10 minutes, I replied. Meet me at the all-night diner across the street from your motel. Do not be late. I arrived at the neon-lit diner 20 minutes later. My security detail secured the perimeter before I even stepped out of the vehicle. The bell above the diner door jingled as I walked inside. Jasmine was sitting in a cracked vinyl booth, shivering in a cheap, oversized sweater. She looked absolutely ruined. Her expensive hair extensions were matted. Her designer makeup was washed away by hours of crying. The woman who had proudly mocked my military uniform just a few months ago was now clutching a cold cup of diner coffee like it was her only lifeline. I slid into the booth across from her. I did not order anything. "Look at me," Jasmine whispered, staring down at her bare ring finger. "He stripped the accounts and ran to Europe. The feds raided our storage unit this morning. I am facing accessory charges because my signature is on the fraudulent property deeds. Chad told me it was just standard real estate paperwork." "Ignorance is not a legal defense, Jasmine," I said coldly. "You mocked my government salary while happily spending the money your husband stole from innocent people. You stood in my driveway and laughed at my courthouse wedding. You chose to align yourself with a racist fraud because he bought you designer bags." Jasmine slammed her hands on the sticky formica table. Her eyes blazed with a sudden, desperate anger. "Because I had to, Maya. You do not understand what it was like growing up in that house with Patricia. You got to leave. You joined the military and escaped. I was trapped." I raised an eyebrow. "You were trapped in luxury while I paid my own way through life." "I was trapped in a cage!" Jasmine hissed, tears spilling over her cheeks. "Do you think Mom loved me just because she bought me things? She bought me things to use me as a prop. Every single day she whispered in my ear that I had to be prettier and richer and better than you. If I did not get better grades or date wealthier men, she would lock me out of her bedroom and ignore me for days. She told me you were a threat. She told me that if I did not outshine you, the community would think our family was a total failure." Jasmine buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. "She turned me into a monster, Maya. She forced me to compete with you my entire life, just to keep her affection. I married Chad because Mom said a white real estate broker would elevate our social status. I hated him, Maya. He used to make disgusting jokes about my hair and my skin, but Mom told me to swallow my pride and secure the bag. I sacrificed my own dignity just to be the golden child. And now I am sitting in a roach-infested motel while she ignores my calls to save herself." I sat back in the vinyl booth, absorbing her confession. For the first time in my entire life, I saw the naked truth behind my sister and her cruelty. She was not born a monster. Patricia had meticulously crafted her into one. Patricia had weaponized Jasmine and her insecurities, creating a loyal attack dog to mask her own parental failures. Jasmine looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "I am sorry, Maya. I am so deeply sorry for everything I did to you. I will testify against Chad. I will testify against Mom. I will do whatever you want. Just please do not leave me here. I have no money for food. I have no place to sleep. Please save me." I looked at the woman sitting across from me. I saw the broken, manipulated child hiding beneath the ruined exterior. I felt a genuine flicker of pity for the agonizing life she had endured under our mother and her relentless control. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. I placed it on the table and slid it across the sticky surface. Jasmine gasped, reaching for it eagerly. "What is this?" "Inside that envelope is $5,000 in untraceable cash." I explained, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "There is also a prepaid cell phone and the contact information for a highly aggressive criminal defense attorney who specializes in federal fraud cases. I have already paid his retainer fee." Jasmine clutched the envelope to her chest, sobbing with overwhelming relief. "Thank you, Maya. Thank you so much. I knew you would not let your little sister drown. I will make this right. I promise I will be a good sister from now on." I stood up from the booth, smoothing the wrinkles from my tailored trousers. I looked down at her, completely detached from her emotional display. "You misunderstood the purpose of that envelope, Jasmine," I said softly. "That is not an invitation for reconciliation. That is a severance package." Jasmine froze, her smile vanishing instantly. "What?" "I validate your pain, Jasmine." I continued, ensuring every word landed with absolute precision. "I acknowledge that Patricia abused you and warped your mind to serve her own narcissistic needs. It is a tragedy that you were forced to sacrifice your soul for her conditional love. But understanding why you are toxic does not mean I have to let you poison my peace." Jasmine shook her head frantically, reaching across the table to grab my sleeve. But I apologized. I said I was sorry. "We are blood, Maya. I pulled my arm out of her grasp. You chose Chad. You chose the lies. You chose to publicly humiliate me and stand by a man who called me racial slurs. You had a choice every single day to break the cycle, and you eagerly participated in my destruction instead. Your trauma explains your behavior, but it does not excuse it. Maya, please do not walk away. I turned toward the diner exit. The attorney will help you navigate your accessory charges, and the cash will keep you fed until you secure a job. But this is the absolute end of our relationship. You are entirely on your own now. Build your own life. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and walked out into the cool night air. Jasmine screamed my name from inside the diner, but I did not look back. I stepped into my waiting armored vehicle and signaled my security team to drive away. The rearview mirror captured the flickering neon sign fading into the darkness, marking the permanent end of my sisterhood. The final loose end was neatly severed, leaving only the architect of our family trauma to face her day of reckoning. 3 weeks later, the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta was swarming with local reporters and murmuring spectators. Patricia federal trial for medical forgery and extortion had become the most anticipated legal event in our community. I walked through the heavy oak doors of the courtroom wearing a tailored charcoal suit flanked by Mr. Carter and a federal prosecutor. The gallery was absolutely packed with church elders, nosy neighbors, and the very same matriarchs Patricia used to host at her lavish Sunday dinners. They had all come to witness the fall of their most prominent socialite. Patricia sat at the defense table, orchestrating the performance of a lifetime. The woman who routinely strutted through the country club in custom designer heels was now dressed in a faded, modest floral dress. She had wrapped a knitted shawl around her shoulders and gripped a wooden cane she absolutely did not need. She sat hunched over, trembling violently whenever the jury looked in her direction, playing the role of the frail, misunderstood elderly black mother to absolute perfection. She dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, trying to project an image of pure, unadulterated victimhood. Her defense attorney, a slick, high-priced lawyer paid for by liquidating the last of her hidden jewelry assets, stood before the judge. He paced the courtroom floor, pointing an accusatory finger directly at me. "Your Honor," the defense attorney declared, his voice echoing with manufactured outrage. "My client is a devout, God-fearing mother who simply wanted to keep her family together. The prosecution wants you to believe Patricia is a mastermind extortionist. But the truth is, she was terrified. She was terrified of her eldest daughter. Colonel Maya Jefferson is a cold, calculating military machine. She returned from her overseas deployments changed, hardened, and aggressive. She amassed a billion-dollar fortune through ruthless corporate tactics, and then systematically destroyed her own family members who dared to ask for help. My client did not extort anyone. She merely staged a desperate intervention to rescue her granddaughter Zuri from a highly unstable military veteran who hoards generational wealth while her own relatives face bankruptcy and ruin." The church elders in the gallery gasped, murmuring amongst themselves. Patricia let out a loud, tragic sob, burying her face in her hands. She peeked through her fingers to check if her performance was landing. I sat perfectly still, my face completely blank. I did not react to the blatant weaponization of my military service or the sickening attempt to paint my success as a symptom of mental illness. I simply waited for the federal prosecutor to stand up. The judge presiding over the case was a formidable African-American woman with decades of experience and zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. She peered over her reading glasses, scrutinizing the defense attorney with absolute disdain. "Are you quite finished, counselor?" the judge asked, her voice slicing through the thick courtroom tension. "Because unless you are claiming your client was hallucinating when she forged psychiatric documents, your narrative about a concerned grandmother is completely legally irrelevant." The defense attorney straightened his tie, attempting to recover. "Your Honor, the context of the family dynamic proves my client lacked malicious intent. She was pressured by a daughter who operates with military-grade cruelty." The federal prosecutor stood up, smoothing his jacket. He walked calmly to the center of the room, holding a small audio drive. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to submit Exhibit A into evidence. This is the unedited audio recording captured by federal agents inside Colonel Jefferson Home Office. It perfectly demonstrates the exact nature of the defendant maternal concern. The judge nodded, granting permission. The prosecutor connected the drive to the courtroom audio system. The crisp, high-definition recording filled the silent courtroom. Patricia's voice blasted through the speakers, completely stripped of her current frail old woman act. The audio captured her arrogant, malicious tone perfectly. "You will lose custody of Zuri before the weekend. The state will place her with me, and as her legal guardian, I will file for immediate child support and asset reallocation from your estate. You will fund this family one way or another. Transfer the $10 million today, or say goodbye to your daughter." The entire gallery erupted into a collective gasp of pure shock. Mother Williams, a prominent church elder, loudly whispered her absolute disgust. The facade was entirely shattered. The congregation finally heard the real Patricia, an extortionist willing to kidnap her own grandchild to fund a fake empire. Patricia dropped her lace handkerchief. Her hunched posture vanished instantly as she sat up straight, her eyes wide with sheer panic. The defense attorney closed his binder, realizing his entire strategy had just been incinerated. "Turn it off!" Patricia shrieked, abandoning her fragile act entirely. "She set me up. She trapped me." The judge slammed her gavel down with thunderous force, commanding immediate silence. "Sit down and remain quiet," the judge ordered, pointing her gavel directly at Patricia. "I have sat on this bench for 20 years. I have seen desperate people do terrible things. But the sheer calculated malice required to forge psychiatric evaluations against an active-duty military officer and use a 9-year-old child as a financial hostage is beyond comprehension. You are not a victim. You are a predator masquerading as a matriarch." Patricia sank back into her wooden chair, trembling with genuine terror as the reality of her situation finally took hold. There was no charm school smile or church donation that could buy her way out of a federal indictment. Patricia Jefferson, the judge, declared, her voice ringing with absolute finality. "You are found guilty of medical forgery, blackmail, and federal extortion. Your attempt to weaponize the family court system and manipulate Child Protective Services is an affront to justice. I hereby sentence you to 48 months in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. Furthermore, due to the deeply disturbing nature of your actions against your own family, I am ordering a mandatory intensive psychiatric evaluation before your transfer to a federal facility. You are remanded into custody immediately." 2 federal marshals approached the defense table, grabbing Patricia by the arms. She thrashed against their grip, screaming for mercy, begging the church elders in the gallery to help her. But the community members simply turned their heads away, refusing to look at the woman who had deceived them for decades. I stood up from the prosecution table, buttoning my suit jacket. I watched my mother being dragged out of the courtroom, her designer heels scraping against the linoleum floor. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. The toxic root of our family tree had finally been completely eradicated. I walked out of the federal courthouse, leaving the chaotic swarm of reporters behind me. Patricia was gone, and the toxic root of our family tree had finally been completely eradicated. But pruning a dead tree often shakes loose the parasites hiding in the remaining branches. My secure mobile device vibrated against my palm the moment I stepped into my armored SUV. It was an urgent alert from Vanguard Intelligence. My lead cyber analyst briefed me through the encrypted channel as my driver navigated the Atlanta traffic. While Patricia was sobbing in front of a federal judge, my brother-in-law, Chad, was busy executing a massive financial drain. He knew his real estate brokerage was bankrupt. He knew his wife Jasmine was living in a roach-infested motel. He knew the federal authorities would eventually turn their full attention to the fraudulent property deeds he had pushed onto his clients. Instead of turning himself in, Chad chose to cut and run. He had spent the last 48 hours liquidating the remaining escrow accounts of his working-class black clients, stealing their life savings. He wired over $8 million through a complex maze of shell companies, routing the stolen funds toward an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. He then abandoned Jasmine, completely leaving her holding the legal liability for his domestic crimes while he booked a one-way first-class ticket to Europe. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an audio file forwarded from my secure Vanguard server. It was a voicemail Chad had left on my public business line just minutes before his flight departed from Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. I connected the phone to the vehicle audio system. Chad's arrogant, slurring voice filled the quiet interior of the SUV. He was clearly drinking champagne in an airport lounge, celebrating his own perceived brilliance. "Listen closely, you aggressive little soldier!" Chad sneered, his voice dripping with absolute racial contempt. "You thought you could bankrupt me. You thought you could parade around in your uniform and destroy my life. But you forgot one crucial detail, Maya. A smart white man always has an exit plan. I am sitting in first class, sipping vintage champagne, while your pathetic sister cries in a motel room. I took $8 million from those gullible church members your mother loves so much. I am flying to a jurisdiction that does not care about your military rank or your fake billion-dollar empire. You can keep the ruined family, Maya. I am keeping the cash." The voicemail ended with the sharp clink of a crystal glass. Chad genuinely believed he had outsmarted a high-ranking military intelligence officer. He believed his white privilege and his stolen millions granted him absolute immunity from consequences. He expected me to scream in frustration. He expected me to call the local police only to find out he was already outside their jurisdiction. I did not raise my voice. I did not panic. I simply tapped the secure communication icon on my dashboard screen and connected directly to the Vanguard Tactical Command Center. "Mr. Carter," I said calmly, addressing my lead corporate litigator and former military intelligence liaison. "Chad is currently airborne on a transatlantic flight heading toward the European Union. He just confessed on a recorded line to embezzling $8 million from domestic escrow accounts. I have the flight. Manifest pulled up." Colonel Carter replied, his fingers flying across a keyboard in the background. "He is on a direct flight to Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. He lands in exactly 7 hours. Should I notify the Federal Bureau of Investigation? The FBI moves too slowly for international airspace." I corrected, smoothing the crease of my uniform trousers. "Contact our military liaisons stationed at the United States Embassy in Paris. Forward the audio confession, the fraudulent wire transfer routing numbers, and the stolen escrow ledgers directly to Interpol Financial Crimes Division. Flag him as an international flight risk, attempting to launder stolen domestic funds." "Understood," Colonel Carter said, a hint of lethal satisfaction in his tone. "What about the offshore accounts?" I looked out the tinted window of the SUV, watching the Atlanta skyline pass by. "Initiate a hostile cyber freeze on the Cayman Island routing numbers," I ordered. "Do not just block the transfer. Seize the funds under the Patriot Act and route the entire $8 million into a federal holding account. By the time Chad steps off that airplane, I want him holding absolutely nothing but his empty champagne glass." 7 hours later, the sleek commercial airliner touched down on the tarmac in Paris. According to the detailed report I received from our embassy contacts, Chad casually strolled off the plane wearing a tailored linen suit. He breezed through the first-class exit lane carrying a single leather duffel bag, fully expecting to walk out into the French sunshine as a wealthy, untouchable expatriate. He did not make it past the customs checkpoint. The moment Chad handed his passport to the border control agent, an alarm blared across the security terminal. Before he could even ask what was happening, 8 heavily armed tactical officers from Interpol surrounded him. They did not read him his rights in a polite conversational tone. They slammed him face first against the polished concrete floor of the international terminal. "Wait!" Chad screamed, thrashing against the officers as heavy steel handcuffs locked around his wrists. "Do you know who I am? I am an American citizen. I have millions of dollars. You cannot touch me. I am a wealthy man." The lead Interpol agent hauled Chad to his feet, searching his pockets and confiscating his cell phone. "You are an international fugitive," the agent stated in a thick French accent. "Your offshore accounts were seized by the United States federal government 4 hours ago. You have 0 assets. You are being detained for grand larceny, wire fraud, and fleeing international prosecution." Chad's face drained of all color. He stared at the officers, his arrogant white supremacist delusion completely shattered on the floor of a foreign airport. He begged them to let him make a phone call. He screamed that his powerful lawyers would destroy them. But his lawyers were already disbarred. and his stolen money was locked inside a federal vault managed by Vanguard Intelligence. I was stripped of his expensive suit, forced into a holding cell, and immediately processed for international extradition back to the United States. He thought his skin color and his stolen wealth gave him an automatic exit strategy. Instead, he had just booked himself a direct ticket to a federal penitentiary where he would spend the next 3 decades of his life answering for every single penny he stole from my community. I received the confirmation photograph on my secure tablet just as I walked into my penthouse. It showed Chad sitting in a bleak European holding cell, stripped of his belt and shoelaces, looking absolutely terrified. I deleted photo and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. The racist parasite was finally caged, and I did not even have to leave my office to put him there. The legal bloodbath that had consumed my family was officially over. Patricia was sitting in a federal prison cell, facing the severe consequences of her own extortion. Chad was locked inside a French holding facility, awaiting a highly publicized extradition back to the United States. Jasmine was navigating the harsh realities of profound poverty in a cheap roadside motel, stripped of her designer bags and her golden child status. Marcus was scrubbing grocery store floors on the night shift, drowning under the weight of a $4 million corporate debt he could never escape. The heavy, suffocating fog that had surrounded my life for years finally lifted entirely. I directed my full attention back to the true purpose of Vanguard Logistics. We were just weeks away from unveiling our crowning achievement in downtown Atlanta. The Vanguard Veterans Support Center was a massive state-of-the-art facility designed to provide comprehensive mental health services, career placement, and housing assistance for returning service members. I funded the entire project directly out of Vanguard corporate reserves. It was my ultimate love letter to the men and women who actually understood the true meaning of loyalty and sacrifice. The media coverage leading up to the grand opening was absolutely unprecedented. Major national news networks covered the facility, praising its highly innovative approach to veteran care. My face was suddenly everywhere. The public narrative had shifted drastically from the sensationalized gossip blog drama to absolute reverence for a successful Black female military officer building real institutional power in her community. With that immense public validation came the inevitable return of the parasites. The extended family members and fake church friends who had blindly supported Patricia suddenly realized they had backed the losing horse. They saw the exclusive guest list for the gala published in the local business journal. It featured state governors, four-star generals, and prominent tech billionaires. Suddenly, my blocked call log was overflowing with desperate voicemails from distant cousins and manipulative church elders. They all wanted a piece of the spotlight. They wanted to network. They expected me to play the role of the forgiving, compliant Black woman who would instantly welcome them back into the fold simply because we shared a bloodline or a church pew. Cousin Ray, who had openly laughed when Patricia mocked my military career, left 4 separate voicemails begging for VIP passes for his aspiring rapper son. Sister Beatrice, who had clutched her pearls and called me a broken woman at Patricia's Sunday dinner, sent a massive floral arrangement to my office demanding a front row seat to the ribbon-cutting ceremony. I instructed my executive assistant to throw the flowers directly into the dumpster and explicitly block their names from every single guest registry. I owed these people absolutely nothing. They stood by and watched my mother try to destroy me. Now they would watch me rise from the outside looking in. The evening of the grand opening was flawlessly executed. Searchlights illuminated the Atlanta skyline sweeping across the glass facade of the new building. A heavy red carpet stretched down the avenue lined with velvet barricades and highly trained Vanguard security personnel. I arrived in a sleek armored vehicle, stepping out into the blinding flashes of the national press cameras. I wore my immaculately pressed colonel dress uniform, walking hand in hand with my beautiful daughter Zuri, who wore a custom navy dress tailored to match my rank. The crowd erupted into loud applause as we walked down the carpet. The governor of Georgia stepped forward to shake my hand, followed closely by the mayor and several commanding officers from my previous overseas deployments. It was a moment of absolute triumph. But as I approached the grand entrance of the facility, I heard a loud, familiar commotion breaking out near the VIP check-in podium. Standing right at the front of the line, trying aggressively to shove their way past the velvet ropes, was a small mob of my estranged relatives. Cousin Ray's sister Beatrice, and a handful of other opportunistic extended family members were dressed in cheap, flashy formal wear. They were arguing violently with my lead security director, demanding immediate entry. "Let us through," Cousin Ray shouted, waving his finger in the face of the massive security guard. "We are the Colonel family. We are VIPs. We have to be on the list. I am her blood cousin." Sister Beatrice adjusted her oversized church hat, nodding vigorously. "Patricia would want us inside to represent the family legacy. You cannot keep the church elders out on the street like commoners. We are here to bless the building." My security director did not flinch. He simply crossed his massive arms and stared them down. I stopped walking, placing a gentle hand on Zuri's shoulder, and turned to face the commotion. The media cameras immediately swiveled to capture the interaction. Cousin Ray saw me and waved frantically. "Maya, tell this giant to move. We are ready to celebrate your success with you. We are family." I looked at the group of leeches, desperate to siphon my hard-earned success. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger. I simply projected my voice with absolute military authority, ensuring the press could capture every single word. "Security," I announced, my voice ringing crystal clear across the red carpet. "These individuals are not on the approved guest registry. They are not Vanguard investors. They are not military veterans. And they are certainly not my family." The greedy smiles instantly vanished from their faces. Cousin Ray, jaw dropped open in shock. Sister Beatrice clutched her cheap purse, looking around at the flashing cameras in sudden sheer panic. "Please escort these trespassers behind the public barricades," I instructed my security director smoothly. "If they attempt to breach the perimeter again, have the Atlanta Police Department arrest them for disturbing a private federal event." The security team moved with terrifying precision. They grabbed the velvet ropes and physically forced the entire group of opportunistic relatives backward, shoving them unceremoniously behind the metal street barricades with the rest of the general public spectators. Cousin Ray yelled in protest, but he was quickly silenced by the menacing glare of an armed police officer. I turned my back on them completely. I held Zuri's hand and walked through the grand glass doors of the facility. The governors and generals clapped me on the shoulder, welcoming me into the elite echelon of true power. Outside, behind the cold metal barricades, the people who had ostracized and mocked me were forced to stand in the humid night air, watching me receive the ultimate glory they could never touch. I stood in the grand atrium of the Vanguard Veteran Support Center, bathing in the flashing lights of the national press. The massive glass doors were behind us now, shutting out the desperate extended relatives left to rot on the sidewalk. I guided Zuri toward the raised velvet stage, positioned precisely in the center of the marble floor. A thick crimson ribbon stretched across the polished podium, waiting to be cut. Zuri looked absolutely breathtaking. She wore a tailored charcoal gray suit, perfectly matching my own military-inspired civilian attire. Her hair was styled in immaculate braids adorned with subtle gold cuffs. She was the absolute picture of generational wealth and black excellence, unbothered by the chaos we had just locked outside. The governor handed me a pair of oversized golden scissors. I leaned down and positioned Zuri's small hands over the metallic grips, placing my own hands firmly over hers. We smiled together for the wall of cameras, capturing the pinnacle of my corporate and military triumphs. Everything was running with absolute precision. The energy in the room was electric, charged with the undeniable power of a community witnessing true strategic victory unfold right before their eyes. Before the metal blades could slice through the crimson fabric, a violent commotion erupted near the side catering entrance. A loud crash echoed across the marble atrium as a tray of champagne glasses shattered against the floor. My Vanguard tactical team immediately shifted their formation, reaching for their earpieces, but the intruder had timed his ambush perfectly, using the distraction of the catering staff to slip through a temporary gap in the perimeter. A man burst into the center of the atrium, sprinting desperately toward the flashing cameras. It was Marcus. He looked completely feral. He was out on bail facing federal fraud charges, and his appearance broadcasted his absolute destruction. He wore a ratty janitor uniform, reeking of industrial bleach and stale sweat. His shoes were scuffed and his face was gaunt, covered in a patchy, unkempt beard. The polished fake entrepreneur who once paraded around Atlanta in custom-tailored suits and leased luxury vehicles was completely gone. In his place stood a broken, desperate parasite who had exhausted every single legal and financial avenue available to him. He was completely out of options and running purely on sheer toxic panic. My security detail lunged forward to intercept him, but Marcus knew exactly what he was doing. He dove straight into the focal point of the national media cameras, throwing his body directly into the path of the flashing lenses. He fell hard onto his knees right at the base of the velvet stage. He threw his hands into the air, contorting his face into a mask of pure, fabricated agony. He was attempting the ultimate narcissistic manipulation tactic. He wanted to weaponize the public against me by playing the repentant black father begging for his family in front of the entire world. He knew I could not quietly make him disappear with dozens of journalists broadcasting live. Tears streamed down his dirty cheeks as he crawled forward on the polished marble. He ignored me completely and locked his desperate bloodshot eyes entirely on our 9-year-old daughter. "Zuri, baby, tell your mom to forgive me," Marcus wailed, his voice cracking with theatrical sorrow. He reached his shaking hands out toward the stage, trying to grab the hem of my daughter-tailored trousers. "We are a family. Tell her to let me come home, baby. Please, Zuri. I am your father. I made mistakes, but a black family needs to stay together. Tell her to drop the charges. Tell her you need your daddy." The entire atrium went completely dead silent. The governors and 4-star generals froze in absolute shock. The journalists practically stopped breathing, keeping their camera lenses fixed on the dramatic scene unfolding at my feet. The flashbulbs fired rapidly, illuminating Marcus' weeping face. He thought he had cornered me. I believed that forcing my young daughter into the spotlight would break my composure. He assumed I would panic and rush to shield Zuri, accidentally giving the media a narrative of an unstable, aggressive woman tearing her child away from a crying father. I did not flinch. I did not step in front of my daughter. I knew exactly how strong I had raised her to be. I simply stood my ground and let Marcus face the reality of the child he had neglected for years to fund his mistresses and his fake empire. Zuri did not cry. She did not tremble or hide behind my legs. She looked down at the weeping, pathetic man kneeling on the floor. Her face was completely devoid of emotion. She possessed the cold, calculating intelligence of a general staring at a defeated enemy. Zuri took one deliberate step backward, escaping his grasping reach. She reached up and wrapped her small hand firmly around my fingers, interlacing them with absolute certainty. Then my brilliant 9-year-old daughter leaned forward toward the hot microphone sitting on the podium. "Who are you?" Zuri asked, her voice echoing crystal clear and sharp across the silent atrium. The crowd gasped collectively. A ripple of pure, unadulterated shock washed over the assembly of dignitaries and press members. The devastation that struck Marcus was instantaneous and absolute. His jaw dropped open, and the fake theatrical tears instantly dried up on his face. The narcissistic illusion he had clung to was completely annihilated by 4 simple words spoken by his own flesh and blood. He had spent her entire childhood ignoring her existence while he played a wealthy corporate king, and now she was returning that exact same indifference when he needed her the most. He was nothing to her. He was just a dirty, frantic stranger interrupting her grand victory. Marcus collapsed forward onto the cold marble floor, weeping loudly, as he was utterly destroyed by his own child's cold and permanent indifference. The heavy thud of tactical boots against the polished marble floor broke the stunned silence inside the atrium. My Vanguard security team did not hesitate for a single second. 4 heavily armored guards surrounded the weeping, pathetic man on the floor. They grabbed Marcus by his soiled uniform, hauling him upright with ruthless efficiency. He did not fight back. The absolute rejection from his own daughter had entirely broken his spirit. His legs gave out beneath him, forcing the security officers to practically drag his dead weight across the grand lobby. Flashbulbs fired in a blinding, rapid rhythm, illuminating the tears streaming down his gaunt, dirty face. The national press captured every agonizing moment of his final, humiliating exit. The heavy glass doors swung open, and the guards tossed him out into the humid Atlanta night, permanently exiling him to the ashes of his own ruined existence. I stood tall at the podium, keeping my hand firmly wrapped around Zuri's small fingers. The metallic click of the glass doors shutting behind Marcus signaled the absolute end of my past. The parasite was gone forever. The journalists immediately shifted their hungry gaze back to the stage. They smelled blood in the water and wanted to capitalize on the sheer drama they had just witnessed. A tall reporter from a major news network shoved his way to the front of the velvet barricade, pointing a microphone directly at me. Colonel Jefferson, the reporter, shouted, his voice echoing loudly over the frantic clicking of cameras. Your rise to billionaire status and the destruction of your ex-husband and family members has been highly publicized. People are calling you ruthless. Is this massive facility and your corporate empire simply an elaborate revenge tactic against the past that hurt you? The generals and state officials standing behind me stiffened clearly, uncomfortable with the aggressive nature of the question. A public relations handler stepped forward to intercept the reporter, but I raised a single gloved hand, stopping him instantly. I did not need anyone to fight my battles. I stepped directly up to the center microphone, adjusting it with absolute calm. I looked down at the reporter and then swept my gaze across the entire sea of cameras broadcasting my image to millions of viewers. Revenge requires a person to care about the people who hurt them. I stated clearly, my voice ringing with undeniable authority. I do not care about the people who tried to destroy me. They are entirely irrelevant to my future. What you just witnessed here today is not revenge. It is the enforcement of a standard. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the silent room. I looked at the prominent African American leaders, investors, and military veterans standing in the crowd. For generations, the Black community has been told that we must sacrifice our mental health and our personal boundaries to protect the image of the family. I continued projecting my voice, so it reached the highest vaulted ceilings of the atrium. We have been conditioned to believe that enduring abuse, financial theft, and emotional manipulation is simply the price of loyalty. We have been taught to chase a toxic definition of generational wealth. My own mother believed that generational wealth meant hoarding money to fund racists and protect criminals just to maintain a fragile illusion of high society status. She believed a Black woman's highest calling was to swallow her pride and fund the delusions of the men who betrayed her. I turned my head and looked down at my beautiful 9-year-old daughter. Zuri stared back at her, dark eyes filled with absolute trust and profound strength. She was completely wrong, I declared, turning my fierce gaze back to the cameras. Generational wealth is not just about leaving money for parasites to drain. It is about leaving a legacy of self-respect, unbreakable boundaries, and the absolute power of the Black woman to protect her peace. The silence in the grand atrium was so absolute you could hear a pin drop. True generational wealth means teaching our daughters that they do not have to shrink themselves to make arrogant men feel tall, I said, my voice rising with unyielding conviction. It means showing our children that they can amputate the toxic branches of their family tree and still grow a massive, beautiful forest of their own. I built Vanguard Logistics to serve the veterans who understand true sacrifice. I built this empire to prove that we can demand absolute excellence from ourselves and zero tolerance for those who try to exploit us. My success is not a reaction to my abusers, it is a monument to my own survival. I stepped back from the microphone. The room remained entirely motionless for 2 heartbeats. Then the governor of Georgia began to clap. The 4-star generals joined him. Within seconds, the entire atrium erupted into a deafening, thunderous standing ovation. The applause shook the glass walls of the facility. Dignitaries, veterans, and even the ruthless journalists cheered wildly for the unvarnished, uncompromising truth I had just delivered. I did not linger to bask in the applause. I had nothing left to prove to anyone in that room. I looked down at Zuri and offered her a soft, genuine smile. She squeezed my hand and smiled back, her spirit completely untouched by the trauma that had tried to claim her. We turned our backs to the flashing cameras and walked gracefully off the velvet stage. The crowd parted respectfully, allowing us to pass through the grand hall without a single interruption. We pushed through the heavy rear exit doors, stepping out into the cool, refreshing night air. A fleet of sleek black armored vehicles idled quietly at the curb, waiting exclusively for us. My elite security detail opened the heavy door of the lead vehicle, holding it steady. I helped Zuri into the plush leather seat before climbing in beside her. The heavy door shut, sealing us in absolute safety and quiet luxury. The motorcade pulled away smoothly, leaving the flashing cameras and the cheering crowds far behind us. I looked out the tinted window, leaning my head back against the seat. High above the illuminated Atlanta streets, the massive glowing logo of Vanguard Logistics and Properties shone brilliantly against the dark city skyline. It stood as a permanent glowing fortress, dominating the horizon. The battles were over. The toxic family was erased. The fake entrepreneur was ruined. I had won completely, leaving my abusers trapped forever in the ashes of their own making. The profound journey we just witnessed teaches us a powerful lesson about the true definition of family self-worth and generational wealth. For too long, many of us are conditioned to believe that enduring emotional abuse, financial exploitation, and blatant disrespect is simply the required cost of family loyalty. We are told to shrink ourselves, hide our success, and swallow our pride to protect the fragile egos of toxic relatives and partners. However, this story brilliantly shatters that destructive narrative. The most important lesson learned is that true generational wealth is not merely about accumulating financial assets or passing down money for entitled individuals to drain. Real generational wealth is about leaving a legacy of absolute self-respect, establishing unbreakable boundaries, and having the courage to protect your own peace at all costs. It teaches us that walking away from toxic bloodlines is not an act of betrayal, but an act of profound self-preservation. Furthermore, we learn that the ultimate form of revenge does not require screaming matches or lowering yourself to the level of your abusers. The greatest retaliation is executing a life of undeniable success, maintaining your integrity, and letting the natural consequences of their own malicious actions destroy their fabricated empires. When you stop enabling those who exploit you, they will eventually collapse under the weight of their own greed. You owe nothing to people who only value you for what they can extract from you. Always remember that your worth is determined by your own standards, never by the inability of broken people to appreciate your light. Have you ever had to draw a hard line and walk away from toxic family members or partners to protect your own peace and future? Share your own experiences of setting boundaries and reclaiming your power in the comments below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering stories of resilience and triumph.